A nuclear sub is moments from catastrophe, and the Pentagon's top engineers have failed. In C-14, Pentagon engineers failed to fix the nuclear sub until the captain called his old Navy chief. One desperate captain makes a risky call that shocks the entire chain of command. An old Navy chief, long dismissed and forgotten, steps aboard with nothing but a duffel bag, and secrets buried deeper than the sub itself. As the pressure builds and systems fall apart, it becomes clear this isn't just a rescue, it's redemption. But why was this man erased from the Navy's memory? And what does he know that no one else dares to admit? Can one forgotten man save what the Pentagon couldn't? Before it's too late? Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. It's amazing how stories like this echo across the world. The low hum of machinery filled the USS Leviathan as it glided through the dark Arctic waters. Captain Belinda Torres stood in the control room, her steady gaze fixed on the navigation displays. The submarine maintained its depth at 400 feet, surrounded by the crushing weight of frigid water and thick ice above. The first warning came as a subtle change, a fluctuation in the reactor's pressure readings that made the monitoring officer straighten in his chair. "Captain," he called out, his voice tight, "we're getting unusual readings from the reactor." Torres moved swiftly to a station, her boots clicking against the metal floor. The numbers on the screen pulsed with an angry red glow, showing pressure levels that shouldn't be possible. Her heart quickened, but her voice remained calm. "Show me the diagnostic report." More warning lights began to flash across the control panels, bathing the room in an eerie crimson glow. The crew's movements became more urgent, their practiced efficiency tinged with growing concern. Torres could feel their eyes darting to her, seeking reassurance. "Pressure continuing to rise, Captain," the reactor technician reported, his fingers flying over the controls. "Primary containment showing stress patterns outside normal parameters." Torres pressed the intercom button, her voice carrying throughout the vessel. "All hands, this is the captain. We have a developing situation with the reactor. Initial emergency protocols are now in effect. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill." The response was immediate. Crew members moved with practiced precision, but Torres could see the tension in their shoulders, hear it in their clipped responses. The reactor was the heart of their submarine. If it failed, they were all dead. "Engineering reports unsuccessful attempts to stabilize pressure levels," her executive officer announced, holding a headset to his ear. "Backup systems are engaging, but showing similar anomalies." Torres studied the growing list of warning indicators, her mind racing through years of training and experience. Nothing in her 2 decades of service had prepared her for these readings. The numbers weren't just bad, they were impossible. "Secondary containment now showing signs of stress," the reactor officer called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Captain, these readings, they're beyond anything in our emergency procedures." The control room fell silent for a moment, the gravity of his words hanging heavy in the air. Torres felt the weight of every crew member's life pressing down on her shoulders, heavier than the Arctic ice above them. "Begin emergency reactor shutdown procedures," she ordered, her voice firm and clear. "Alert all departments to prepare for possible loss of main power. Engineering, I want options for auxiliary power systems." As her crew scrambled to comply, Torres moved to the central command station, her fingers tracing their position on the tactical display. They were deep under the ice, in one of the most hostile environments on Earth. If they lost power here— "Ma'am," her executive officer said quietly, standing close, "these readings suggest we're dealing with something beyond standard containment protocols. Should we consider evacuating?" Torres finished, keeping her voice low. "Under 400 feet of water, and God knows how many miles of ice, we need to solve this here and now, or we don't solve it at all." Another alarm joined the chorus, this one higher pitched and more urgent. "Radiation levels rising in the reactor compartment," the monitoring officer announced. still within safety margins but climbing steadily. Torres watched as more red warnings appeared on the screens, each one representing another step toward disaster. This wasn't just an emergency. It was quickly becoming a nightmare. Her training had covered reactor problems, but nothing like this. The systems weren't just failing, they were acting in ways that defied explanation. "Get me a direct line to the reactor room," she ordered, picking up a headset, "and someone find me those emergency procedure manuals, all of them." As her crew rushed to comply, Torres took a deep breath, steadying herself. The lives of 137 men and women rested in her hands. Whatever was happening to their reactor, whatever was causing these impossible readings, she had to find a way through it. The reactor officer's voice cut through her thoughts. "Captain, primary containment pressure now exceeding maximum measurable levels. We're operating completely outside standard emergency procedures." Torres looked around the control room, meeting the eyes of her crew. She saw fear there, yes, but also determination and trust. They were looking to her for leadership, for a way out of this crisis that seemed to defy their training and experience. "Listen up," she said, her voice carrying across the now quiet control room. "I know these readings don't make sense. I know we're beyond what our procedures cover, but we are not giving up. This is our boat, and we are going to save her. Together." The crew straightened at her words, drawing strength from her conviction. But as Torres turned back to the reactor displays, she knew that conviction alone wouldn't be enough. They needed answers, and they needed them fast. Whatever was happening in their reactor was unlike anything she'd seen in her career, and time was running out. The heavy thrum of helicopter blades cut through the Arctic silence as the Pentagon response team arrived. Captain Torres watched from the control room as Dr. Marcus Steinberg swept in, his expensive suit a stark contrast to the submarine's utilitarian environment. Behind him, a team of civilian engineers lugged cases of sophisticated equipment. Steinberg barely acknowledged Torres's extended hand, his eyes already fixed on the reactor monitoring stations. "I'll need immediate access to your systems," he announced, adjusting his gold cufflinks. "My team will begin implementing our diagnostic protocols." Torres maintained her professional composure. "Of course, Doctor, but first I'd like to brief you on what our crew has observed." "Captain," Steinberg cut her off, his tone dismissive. "I've reviewed the data during our flight. Your vessel's antiquated monitoring systems are clearly the root of our problem." He gestured to the analog gauges that lined the walls. "Primitive equipment like this belongs in a museum, not a modern submarine." The control room fell silent. Torres noticed her crew's reactions. Tight jaws, squared shoulders, wounded pride in their eyes. These were experienced sailors who knew their ship inside and out. "These systems have served us reliably for years," Torres said evenly. "They've never given us false readings before." Steinberg's laugh was sharp and hollow. "That's precisely the problem, Captain. You're dealing with 21st century reactor dynamics using technology from the last century." He turned to his team. "Begin setting up the advanced diagnostic array. We'll need to establish a proper digital monitoring network." The civilian engineers swarmed the control room, their sleek laptops and tablets creating a jarring contrast against the submarine's rugged controls. They worked with the casual confidence of people who believed technology could solve any problem. "Sir," one of Torres's reactor technicians spoke up, "these pressure variations don't match any known failure patterns. We've tried—" "Of course they don't," Steinberg interrupted, not even looking up from his tablet. "Your limited understanding of modern nuclear dynamics wouldn't allow you to recognize the patterns we're seeing in our advanced models." Torres watched as her crew member's face flushed red. She stepped forward, placing herself between Steinberg and her sailors. "Doctor, these men and women have years of hands-on experience with this reactor." "Experience with outdated systems," Steinberg replied. He finally looked up, his expression a mixture of pity and condescension. "Captain, I understand your loyalty to your crew, But this situation requires expertise beyond turning wrenches and reading analog dials. The civilian team continued their work, installing sensors and running cables. Their equipment filled the control room with new sounds: the whir of cooling fans, the beep of diagnostic tools, the soft clicking of keyboards. "Initial software patch uploading now," one of Steinberg's engineers announced. "This should help stabilize the reactor's control systems." Torres moved to the main reactor display, where the warning lights continued their ominous dance. "Pressure levels are still climbing," she reported. "No change in the containment readings." "Give the system time to calibrate," Steinberg said, his attention fixed on his tablet. "Our models show this solution has a 98.7% chance of success." Minutes ticked by. The new equipment gathered data, ran simulations, and suggested solutions. But the reactor's warnings grew more intense. New alarms joined the chorus, their urgent tones cutting through the artificial calm of clicking keyboards. "Doctor," Torres said, her voice tight with concern, "the radiation levels are increasing faster now. Whatever your system is doing, it's not helping." Steinberg frowned at his displays. "Impossible. Our models clearly indicate—" "Wait." His fingers flew across the screen. "Upload the secondary patch. Increase the processing power for the diagnostic arrays." Torres watched as her experienced reactor technicians exchanged worried glances. They could read the old analog gauges from across the room, their years of experience telling them what the fancy digital displays couldn't, that their submarine was in serious trouble. "Captain," her chief engineer called out, "primary containment pressure is approaching critical levels." The old sensors never lie about this kind of reading. "The sensors are obsolete," Steinberg snapped. "Our modern systems will handle this. Just give them time to process the data properly." Torres looked between her crew and the civilian team, two worlds colliding in her control room. On one side, sailors who had lived with this reactor for years, who knew every sound it made, every vibration it produced. On the other, engineers with advanced degrees and expensive equipment, dismissing years of practical experience as outdated thinking. The reactor warnings continued to intensify, their urgent message unchanged by all the new technology surrounding them. Torres watched as Steinberg's confident expression began to show cracks of concern, his fingers moving faster across his tablet as he tried another solution and another, while the situation steadily worsened. 3 days passed like a slow-moving nightmare aboard the USS Leviathan. Captain Torres stood in the control room, her shoulders tight with tension, as she watched yet another of Dr. Steinberg's digital solutions fail. The constant hum of computers had become as familiar as the reactor warnings, but neither sound brought any comfort. "Implementing patch version 16.0, one of the civilian engineers announced, his voice lacking the confidence from 3 days ago. The clicking of keyboards filled the air, followed by the inevitable warning tones from the reactor monitoring system. Torres watched the pressure gauge, the old, reliable analog dial that Steinberg had dismissed as primitive. Its needle crept steadily into the red zone, just as it had after every other attempted fix. She pressed her fingers against her temples, fighting a headache that had become her constant companion. "The new algorithms should stabilize the containment field," Steinberg insisted, though his polished demeanor had begun to crack. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his expensive suit jacket hung forgotten over a chair. "We just need to refine the parameters." Chief Engineer Martinez approached Torres, keeping his voice low. "Captain, the old sensors are showing radiation levels up another 12% since yesterday. We've never seen readings like this." The weight of 400 feet of Arctic ice pressed down on them, a frozen ceiling that kept them trapped with a failing reactor. Torres felt the pressure of it all, the ice above, the depth below, and the lives of every crew member resting on her decisions. In the crew's mess later that evening, Torres noticed the toll the crisis was taking on her sailors. Conversations were muted, faces drawn with worry. These were men and women who trusted their training, who understood their ship's systems intimately. Now they watched helplessly as strangers with tablets and theories failed to save their vessel. Third watch reporting increased vibrations in the reactor housing, a young technician reported during the midnight briefing. The Pentagon team says their instruments don't detect any anomalies, but... He trailed off, the unspoken truth hanging in the air. The crew didn't trust the new equipment. Torres retreated to her quarters, staring at the official protocols spread across her desk. Every procedure, every regulation, every approved method had been tried. She pulled out an old photograph, faded and worn around the edges. It showed a younger version of herself standing next to Commander Dutch Harrison, her mentor from her midshipman days. "What would you do, Dutch?" she whispered to the photo. The old submarine veteran had taught her to trust her instincts, to listen to her crew, and most importantly, to remember that sometimes the book answers weren't the right answers. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. "Captain," Lieutenant Chen called through the door. "Doctor, Steinberg's latest diagnostic scan just completed. No change in the reactor status." Torres set down the photograph, her mind racing back to lessons learned under Dutch's guidance. He had stories about impossible situations, about times when unconventional solutions saved lives. She remembered him teaching her about the reactor systems, his calloused hands pointing out details no computer could detect. "Thank you, Lieutenant," she replied, but her attention was already elsewhere. Dutch had retired to Alaska, not far from where they were currently trapped under the ice. He had decades of experience with these older reactor systems, knowledge that went beyond manuals and computer models. The next morning, Torres observed another failed attempt by the Pentagon team. Steinberg's voice had lost its condescending edge, replaced by barely concealed panic, as he tried to explain why his latest solution hadn't worked. "The models clearly indicated, I don't understand why the algorithms aren't..." He trailed off, staring at his screens as if they might suddenly reveal the answer he needed. Torres watched her crew's faces, tired, worried, but still professional. They maintained their stations, monitored their gauges, and waited for orders that might save them. The faith in their eyes when they looked to her for leadership felt heavier than the ice above. Standing in front of the old analog control panel, Torres ran her fingers along the dials and switches. Each one had a story, a purpose, a lesson Dutch had taught her. The sophisticated displays Steinberg's team had installed blinked and flickered nearby, but they hadn't brought them any closer to a solution. "Captain," Martinez said quietly, joining her at the panel, "whatever you're thinking, we're with you. The crew knows these Pentagon solutions aren't working." Torres nodded, her decision crystallizing. Protocol dictated that they continue following the Pentagon's lead, but protocol hadn't accounted for a situation like this. Dutch would understand the reactor's behavior in ways these modern engineers couldn't. He would see patterns in the old gauges, hear meanings in the machinery's rhythms that no computer could decode. She touched the photograph in her pocket, feeling the worn edges through her uniform. Going outside official channels, reaching out to a retired commander, it could end her career. But as another warning light flickered to life on the panel, Torres knew she had run out of conventional options. The lives of her crew mattered more than regulations. Dutch had taught her that lesson years ago, and now it was time to put it into practice. Captain Torres sat in her quarters, staring at the secure satellite phone. Her hands trembled slightly as she dialed the number she'd tracked down through old Navy connections. The engine repair shop's line rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. "Kowalski's Engine Repair." "Chief Kowalski, this is Captain Belinda Torres from the USS Leviathan." She paused, gathering her courage. "We need your help." There was a long silence on the other end. When Dutch spoke again, his voice carried 15 years of buried pain. "I'm not Chief anything anymore, Captain. Haven't been for a long time." "I know about what happened, Dutch. About the discharge." Torres pressed on, hearing the sound of tools being set down in the background. "But we have 150 crew members trapped under Arctic ice with a failing reactor. The Pentagon solutions aren't working." The Pentagon. Dutch let out a bitter laugh. Let me guess. They sent their engineers with their fancy computers and their theories? Yes, and nothing's working. The reactor pressure keeps climbing. We need someone who understands these older systems. Someone who's actually worked with them. Captain, Dutch's voice softened slightly. I appreciate you reaching out, but I'm not exactly welcome in Navy circles anymore. They made that pretty clear when they stripped my rank. Torres leaned forward in her chair, gripping the phone tighter. Tell me what happened, Dutch. The real story. The sound of a heavy sigh came through the line, followed by the scrape of a chair. 15 years ago, the Pentagon decided to cut costs by removing experienced chiefs from nuclear oversight positions. Said their new automated systems could do the job better, cheaper. His voice grew harder. I'd seen too many close calls that only human experience caught in time. When I spoke up, showed them the risks, they didn't want to hear it. You challenged them directly? Went straight to the Admiral with documentation, safety reports, everything. Next thing I know, I'm being charged with insubordination, violating chain of command. Dutch paused. They needed to make an example of someone. I was it? Torres could hear the years of frustration in his voice. They gave you a dishonorable discharge for trying to protect people? They called it undermining military authority and refusing to adapt to modernization. Now I fix boat engines in Norfolk. Another bitter laugh. At least there, when something's wrong, I can actually fix it. Dutch, Torres said softly. I was your midshipman once. You taught me that the most important thing was protecting our crew. That sometimes doing the right thing means standing up to the wrong orders. And look where that got me. Look where following protocol is getting us now. Torres glanced at her door, lowering her voice. We've tried everything by the book. My crew is scared, Dutch. These reactor readings, I've never seen anything like them. The line went quiet, except for Dutch's breathing. Torres could almost see him, those sharp blue eyes probably staring out his shop window, weighing the cost of getting involved again. What are your pressure readings? He finally asked. Torres quickly rattled off the numbers from her latest report. She heard Dutch inhale sharply. And they're still trying computer fixes? Nothing else in the approved procedures. Torres felt a glimmer of hope at his engaged tone. Dutch, I know I'm asking you to risk a lot after what they did to you. This isn't about me, Dutch cut her off. 150 crew members, you said? Yes. Young kids? Families waiting back home? Yes. Another long pause filled the line. Torres held her breath, listening to the distant sound of Arctic ice groaning against the hull. Those Pentagon boys, Dutch finally said, they ever tell you about the Johnston incident, 1987? No. Nearly lost a boat. Same reactor system you're running now. No computer caught it. It was an old chief who heard something wrong in the auxiliary cooling pump. Dutch's voice had lost its bitterness, replaced by the tone Torres remembered from her training days. The human element, Captain. That's what they tried to engineer out of the equation. Torres waited, hearing the unspoken weight of his words. Finally, Dutch spoke again, his voice firm with decision. Send me your full readings, everything you've got, especially from the analog systems. Papers rustled in the background. And Captain? Yes? Those 150 souls on your boat? They're worth whatever heat comes my way? I'll help? Torres felt tears prick at her eyes. Thank you, Dutch. Don't thank me yet. She could hear him moving around his shop, purpose in his steps. Just remember, when the brass finds out you contacted me, your career might end up looking a lot like mine. I know, Torres said quietly, but like you taught me, some things matter more than rank. All right then, Dutch said, and Torres could hear the ghost of a smile in his voice. Let's see what kind of mess these modern miracles have got you into. Dutch stepped through the submarine's narrow hatch, his worn leather work boots marking a sharp contrast to the polished dress shoes of the Pentagon team gathered in the control room. Dr. Marcus Steinberg stood at the center of his engineers, tablet computer in hand, looking at Dutch as if he were something unpleasant stuck to the bottom of his expensive loafers. "Captain Torres," Steinberg said, his voice dripping with disapproval, "when you said you were bringing in outside help, I assumed you meant qualified consultants, not..." He waved his manicured hand dismissively at Dutch's oil-stained work clothes. "A mechanic?" Dutch set down his battered toolbox, the metal clang echoing through the tense silence. His weathered face remained neutral, but his blue eyes hardened like Arctic ice. "Chief Petty Officer Franklin Kowalski, retired. I've got 30 years' experience with these reactor systems." "Had experience?" Steinberg corrected with a smirk. "The technology has evolved considerably since your time. We're dealing with sophisticated computer systems now, not wrenches and gut feelings." Captain Torres stepped forward, her posture rigid with authority. "Dr. Steinberg, Chief Kowalski has my full confidence. His expertise with these older systems could be invaluable." "Older systems?" Steinberg laughed, gesturing to his team's array of laptops and diagnostic equipment. "Captain, we've spent millions modernizing these submarines. Every system is state-of-the-art." "Except the reactor core itself," Dutch said quietly, moving toward the engineering station. "That's still the same Mark 48 design from 1985, just with fancy new controls layered on top." Steinberg's face reddened. "Controls that have revolutionized nuclear submarine operations. Our automated systems can monitor and adjust reactor parameters 1,000 times per second." Dutch ran his calloused hand along the analog backup gauges, wiping away a thin layer of dust. "And how's that working out for you so far?" The Pentagon engineer stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Listen, Kowalski, I've spent 15 years developing these systems. They're certified by every relevant authority. We don't need some disgraced chief who couldn't adapt to progress interfering with our work." 15 years? Dutch nodded thoughtfully. "That's about when you pushed through the removal of experienced chiefs from nuclear oversight, isn't it? How many close calls have you had since then that never made it into the official reports?" Steinberg's jaw clenched. "That's classified information?" "That's what I thought." Dutch turned to Captain Torres. "Ma'am, I need to see the reactor compartment, and I want to talk to your engineering crew, the ones who actually work with these systems every day." "Absolutely not," Steinberg cut in. "The reactor space is restricted to authorized personnel only. My team is handling the diagnostic process." Torres squared her shoulders. "Dr. Steinberg, this is still my boat. Chief Kowalski has temporary authorization under my command." "This is highly irregular, Captain. The Pentagon will hear about this." "They certainly will," Torres agreed firmly. "They'll hear about either our success or our failure. Right now, I'm more concerned with keeping my crew alive than following bureaucratic protocols." Dutch was already moving, his experienced eyes scanning readouts and gauge positions. He pulled a worn notebook from his pocket, making quick notes while Steinberg's team huddled around their screens. "Chief," one of the young engineers called out, unable to completely hide his curiosity, "what exactly are you looking for?" "Patterns," Dutch replied, not looking up from his notes. "Vibrations. The way the system talks to you, if you know how to listen." Steinberg scoffed. "We have sensors for that. Advanced acoustic monitoring that tells you what's happening now?" Dutch interrupted. "I'm looking for what happened before. The little changes that led up to this." He pointed to a maintenance log. "Who usually works this station?" "Petty Officer Chen," Torres answered. "He's been our reactor technician for 3 years." "Get him up here." Dutch continued his methodical inspection. "And I want to see the hard copy logs from the last 6 months." "Those old paper logs are redundant," Steinberg protested. "Everything's stored in our digital system." "Humor me," Dutch said dryly. Sometimes people write down things in margins that never make it into official reports. Things that don't fit the approved parameters, but might just save our lives. Torres nodded to a junior officer who hurried off to fetch the requested logs. Steinberg watched with barely contained fury as his authority was slowly eroded by this man in work boots and faded dungarees. "Captain," Steinberg said tightly, "I must formally protest this violation of security protocols. When we return to port, Torres cut him off, you can file whatever protest you like. Right now, we're 400 feet under Arctic ice with a reactor in crisis. I'll take experience over protocols." Dutch looked up from his inspection, meeting Steinberg's hostile glare with calm determination. "Dr. Steinberg, I'm not here to fight about who's right or wrong. I'm here because there are 150 people on this boat who want to see their families again. Now, you can help me, or you can stand there looking offended. Your choice." The tension crackled between them like an electrical short. Old school versus new technology, hands-on experience versus theoretical knowledge. A man who'd sacrificed his career for safety versus one who'd built his career on automation. The submarine's fate hung in the balance of their clash. Petty Officer Chen arrived with a stack of worn logbooks, their pages dog-eared and filled with handwritten notes. Dutch settled into the engineering station, spreading the books around him like well-worn tools. His fingers traced down columns of numbers and annotations, while the Pentagon team's computers hummed in the background. "Look at this," Dutch murmured, tapping a notation from 3 months ago. "Minor pressure fluctuations during routine power adjustments, barely within normal range, but consistent." He flipped through more pages, nodding slowly. Getting worse over time, the old analog sensors were picking it up, but the new system kept auto-correcting. Captain Torres leaned over his shoulder. "Why wouldn't the digital systems flag that pattern?" "Because they're programmed to maintain optimal parameters," Dutch explained, his voice heavy with recognition. "These pressure variances, I've seen them before. Back when we first designed these fail-safe systems in 1982. He ran his calloused hand along the reactor control panel. "This boat's got the same setup we installed on the early Los Angeles-class subs." Steinberg stepped forward, tablet computer clutched like a shield. "That's precisely why we upgraded the control systems. The old analog fail-safes were imprecise, prone to human error." "They weren't imprecise," Dutch countered, pulling out his own worn notebook. "They were designed to work with the reactor's natural rhythms, like a pressure relief valve that responds to the actual forces involved, not some computer's idea of what those forces should be." He stood up, moving to the main engineering display where Steinberg's team had installed their diagnostic equipment. Cables snaked from sleek laptops into the submarine systems, digital interfaces grafted onto analog bones. "Your automated controls are fighting the original fail-safes," Dutch said, pointing to the readouts. "Every time the old system tries to compensate for the pressure buildup, your computers override it, forcing everything back to textbook parameters." "That's exactly what they're supposed to do," Steinberg snapped. "Maintain optimal operating conditions." Dutch shook his head. "Reactors aren't textbooks, Doctor. They're living things, with their own quirks and patterns. The original fail-safes were designed to flex with those patterns, not fight them." He turned to Petty Officer Chen. "You've felt it, haven't you? The subtle vibrations when you're running diagnostics? The way the system pulls slightly to port during power adjustments?" The young technician's eyes widened. "Yes, sir. I documented it in the logs, but the computer always showed everything within normal ranges." "Because the computer doesn't know what normal feels like," Dutch said. "It only knows what the programming tells it." He pointed to a series of connections where the new diagnostic equipment interfaced with the original systems. These digital overrides are blocking the analog fail-safes from doing their job, like putting a brick on a car's gas pedal and calling it cruise control. Steinberg's face flushed red. "That's absurd. Our systems are designed to prevent exactly these kinds of dangerous fluctuations. No, Dutch said firmly. They're designed to prevent variations from theoretical norms. But this reactor's been running hot for months, trying to tell us something's wrong. The old fail-safes would have shut it down weeks ago, but your computers kept forcing it back into operation. He turned to Captain Torres. The pressure's building because the system can't release it naturally anymore, like a pot with the steam vent blocked, sitting on high heat while the temperature gauge insists everything's fine. Torres studied the readouts, her expression grave. Can we disconnect the digital controls? Return to the original systems? Absolutely not, Steinberg interrupted. That would violate every safety protocol. These automated systems are certified by people who've never had to feel a reactor's pulse through their hands at 3 in the morning, Dutch finished. People who think experience can be replaced with algorithms. He opened another logbook, pointing to a diagram sketched in the margin. Look here. Chen documented the exact pattern I helped design fail-safes for 40 years ago. The subtle pressure drops, the temperature spikes. It's the same problem we solved back then, but now the computer won't let the solution work. Those old analog systems were replaced for a reason, Steinberg insisted. They were outdated, inefficient. They were designed by people who understood that not everything can be reduced to ones and zeros, Dutch said quietly. People who knew that sometimes you need human judgment, human experience, to read between the lines of raw data. Captain Torres straightened, her decision visible in her posture. Dr. Steinberg, I want to hear options for safely disconnecting your digital systems. Captain, I must strongly protest. Reverting to obsolete technology in a crisis is exactly what we need to do, Dutch finished. Because right now, your modern solution is making everything worse. Those old systems you called primitive, they're trying to save our lives, but your computers won't let them. The tension in the control room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Steinberg's team huddled around their equipment, whispering urgently among themselves. Dutch stood by the analog panels, his weathered hands resting on controls he'd helped install decades ago. Between them, Captain Torres watched the reactor readings continue their ominous climb, knowing her next decision could mean life or death for everyone aboard. Dutch reached for the manual override controls, his movements precise and deliberate. We need to disengage the digital interfaces one system at a time, he explained, his voice steady despite the tension in the room. Start with the primary coolant loop and work our way through. Stop right there. Steinberg's sharp command cut through the engineering space. He pulled out his phone, brandishing it like a weapon. One more move, and I'm calling the Judge Advocate General's office. You have no authority to be on this vessel. The room fell silent except for the constant hum of machinery. Dutch's hand froze above the control panel, his weathered features hardening into a mask of frustration. This man was dishonorably discharged, Steinberg continued, addressing Captain Torres directly. His presence here is a direct violation of military protocol. Every minute he remains aboard is another charge I can add to the court-martial proceedings. Torres stood straighter, her dark eyes moving between Dutch and Steinberg. Doctor, we have 150 lives at stake. Dutch's experience is irrelevant, Steinberg cut in. His discharge stripped him of all clearances and authorities. Any modifications he makes to these systems would constitute criminal tampering with military equipment. He smiled thinly, not to mention invalidating all of our contractor warranties and safety certifications. Dutch turned away from the controls, his calloused hands clenching into fists. You're willing to risk this entire crew to protect your contracts? I'm protecting the integrity of naval operations, Steinberg replied smoothly. These systems were approved through proper channels. Every modification, every upgrade has been tested and certified. Unlike your seat-of-the-pants approach. The reactor warning system chirped again, its tone more insistent. Petty Officer Chen glanced nervously at the pressure gauges, which continued their steady climb. "Captain," Dutch said quietly, "that sound means we've got maybe 2 hours before containment starts to fail. I can fix this, but not if we waste time arguing about paperwork." Torres rubbed her temples, the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. "Dr. Steinberg, I have the authority to grant emergency access." "With all due respect, Captain, you don't." Steinberg's voice was cold. "Your authority extends to military personnel only. Allowing an unauthorized civilian to access critical systems during an emergency? That's a career-ending decision." He paused meaningfully. "Possibly even criminal negligence." Dutch watched Torres wrestle with the decision, seeing the same institutional trap that had ended his own career 15 years ago. "He's right about one thing, Captain," Dutch said softly. "Don't throw away your career for me. These people need you in command." "These people need your expertise," Torres countered, but her voice carried a note of defeat. "What they need is to follow proper procedures," Steinberg insisted. He gestured to his team. "We have certified engineers, approved protocols. We'll solve this through official channels." Another warning tone joined the first, creating an anxious duet. Chen's fingers flew over his keyboard, but the automated systems continued their futile attempts to normalize the readings. "Captain," Steinberg pressed, "I need you to order this man off the engineering deck, now, before he compromises any more systems." Dutch looked at the reactor controls, seeing the solution so clearly. A few simple adjustments to restore the original fail-safe parameters. 10 minutes of work that could save everyone aboard. But Steinberg's phone remained raised, ready to unleash the full weight of military justice. "I won't risk your career, Captain," Dutch said finally, stepping back from the panel. "But for God's sake, listen to those warnings. Your automated systems aren't fixing this. They're making it worse." Torres straightened her uniform, command mask firmly in place, despite the conflict in her eyes. "Chief Kowalski, please step away from the engineering station." "Captain," Dutch began, but she raised her hand. "That's an order," she said quietly. "I cannot allow unauthorized modifications to ship's systems during an emergency situation." Steinberg smiled triumphantly. "A wise decision, Captain. Now, if you'll escort him to—" Another alarm joined the chorus, this one deeper and more urgent. Chen's face went pale as he studied the readings. "Primary coolant pressure exceeding safety margins," he reported. "Automated corrections failing to compensate." Dutch took another step back, hands raised in surrender but voice urgent. "Captain, you're running out of time. Those alarms are telling you exactly what I've been saying. The digital systems are fighting against the reactor's natural safety measures." "Dr. Steinberg will handle this," Torres said, each word carefully measured. "Through proper channels." "Of course," Steinberg agreed smoothly. "My team has several approved procedures we can implement." He turned to his engineers, who huddled around their computers, faces lit by screen glare, as the warning tones continued their ominous symphony. Dutch looked one last time at the reactor controls, then at Torres. In her eyes, he saw the same helpless frustration he'd felt 15 years ago, watching institutional politics override common sense. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the engineering compartment's exit, leaving behind the sound of failing systems and Steinberg's satisfied commands to his team. The harsh blare of the general quarters alarm shattered the tense silence. Red warning lights bathed the submarine's narrow corridors in an eerie glow as Dutch made his way toward the crew quarters. Behind him, he heard Steinberg barking orders to his team. "Radiation warning! Radiation warning!" The automated announcement echoed through the vessel's steel halls. "All hands implement emergency protocol Sierra 7. Dutch froze mid-step, his decades of experience telling him exactly what that meant. The reactor's primary coolant system had breached. He spun around, watching crew members rushing to their emergency stations, pulling out radiation badges and checking the color-changing strips that would warn them of exposure. Captain Torres's voice crackled over the intercom, steady despite the crisis. "All hands, this is the captain. We have confirmed radiation readings above normal levels in engineering spaces. All personnel implement exposure protocols immediately. This is not a drill. Through the growing chaos, Dutch could hear the distinctive hiss of escaping coolant, adding its voice to the symphony of alarms. His mind raced through the reactor's layout, visualizing exactly where the breach had to be. The digital systems had pushed the old analog failsafes too far, creating pressure points the original design never intended to handle. Petty Officer Chen burst out of the engineering compartment, his face pale beneath his radiation badge. "Chief, the readings are climbing everywhere. Dr. Steinberg's team can't get the automated systems to respond." "How bad?" Dutch demanded, already knowing the answer. "Bad enough that we've got maybe 30 minutes before we hit dangerous exposure levels throughout the boat." Chen glanced nervously at his radiation badge. "The coolant leak is spreading contamination through the ventilation system." Dutch's jaw tightened as he watched more crew members hurrying past, some already showing signs of anxiety as they checked their radiation indicators. 150 people, all trapped in a steel tube under hundreds of feet of Arctic ice, all facing invisible death if someone didn't act fast. The engineering compartment door burst open again as Torres emerged, her face grim. "Dutch, I need options. Steinberg's team is talking about computer models and system resets, but we don't have time for that anymore." "There's only one option left," Dutch said quietly. "Manual shutdown of the reactor and emergency coolant restoration. But it has to be done from inside the reactor compartment itself. The radiation levels in there." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Torres understood immediately. That's a suicide mission. The exposure levels would be lethal within minutes. 5 minutes is all I need." Dutch's blue eyes held the same intensity they had during his Navy days. "I helped design these systems, Captain. I know exactly what needs to be done. But Steinberg dash." "Forget Steinberg," Torres snapped. "We've got 150 people about to face severe radiation exposure. Protocol isn't going to save them." As if emphasizing her point, another alarm joined the cacophony. Chen checked his tablet, his hands shaking slightly. "Captain, radiation levels just spiked in the crew quarters. We're seeing elevated readings in all compartments now." Dutch watched crew members streaming past, some already showing signs of radiation sickness, nausea, dizziness, growing fear in their eyes. The invisible killer was spreading through their air, through their water, through the very walls of their steel sanctuary. "Captain," he said firmly, "I need your authorization to enter the reactor compartment. Not as a contractor, not as a civilian consultant, just as someone who knows how to stop this." Torres looked at her radiation badge, then at the growing chaos around them. Through the intercom, they could hear Steinberg still insisting his team could solve the crisis through approved channels. More alarms joined the chorus as radiation levels continued climbing throughout the submarine. "Do it," Torres said finally. "Whatever happens after, I'll take responsibility. Just save my crew." Dutch nodded once, already moving toward the engineering spaces. "Chen, I need the reactor compartment access codes and a radiation suit. The best one you've got, though it won't help much where I'm going." "You'll hit lethal exposure levels in minutes," Chen warned, hurrying alongside him. "Then I better work fast." Dutch managed a grim smile. Sometimes the old ways are the only ways that work, especially when fancy computers stop talking to each other. As Chen rushed to get the radiation gear, Dutch took one last look at the crew moving through the red-lit corridors. 150 lives hanging in the balance. The same number he'd tried to protect 15 years ago when he challenged the Pentagon's decisions. This time there would be no hearings, no debates about policy, just one man, his experience, and a race against invisible death. "Hurry!" Torres called as Chen returned with the radiation suit. "Engineering reports the coolant leak is accelerating. We're running out of time." Dutch began pulling on the protective gear, his movements quick and precise despite his age. The alarms continued their urgent warning as radiation levels crept steadily higher throughout the submarine. In minutes, he would step into one of the most dangerous places on Earth, a compromised nuclear reactor compartment. But this time, no bureaucrat could stop him from doing what needed to be done. Dutch pulled open the drawer of maintenance records, his hands still trembling from what he'd witnessed in the reactor compartment. The emergency cooling measures he'd implemented would buy them a few hours at most. He needed answers about how things had gotten this bad. The submarine's documentation room was cramped, filled with decades of paper records that had never been digitized. While Steinberg and his team huddled over their tablets in the control room, Dutch knew the truth would be found in these dusty files. Come on, he muttered, flipping through yellowed pages of reactor maintenance logs. His eyes scanned dates and signatures, looking for the moment when everything changed. The fluorescent light flickered overhead as he pulled out another folder. Then, he saw it. A report from 3 years ago, marked Critical System Assessment. Dutch's heart began pounding as he read. The document detailed serious design flaws in Steinberg's automated reactor control systems, flaws that perfectly matched the current crisis. Son of a gun, Dutch whispered, pulling out more files. Each new document built a darker picture. Internal memos warning about system vulnerabilities. Engineering assessments recommending a return to manual oversight. Budget reports showing millions of dollars in automation contracts awarded to Steinberg's company. And at the bottom of each report, Steinberg's signature, along with notes directing the documents to be archived pending further review. Code words for burial? Dutch's hands shook as he spread the papers across the small desk. The evidence was clear. Steinberg had known about these problems for years. The automated systems were fundamentally flawed, unable to properly manage reactor pressure under extreme conditions. The old analog failsafes that Dutch had helped design would have prevented this crisis, the very systems Steinberg had labeled as primitive and replaced. Looking for something specific? Dutch turned to find Steinberg standing in the doorway, his expensive suit wrinkled from hours of crisis management. The doctor's face was carefully neutral, but his eyes fixed on the scattered documents. 3 years, Dutch said quietly. You knew about these problems for 3 years, but fixing them would have cost you those fat Pentagon contracts, wouldn't it? Steinberg stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. You don't understand the complexities of modern defense contracting, Chief Kowalski. Sometimes compromises dash. Compromises? Dutch's voice rose. There are 150 people on this boat facing radiation exposure because you buried safety reports to protect your bottom line. I made a judgment call, Steinberg snapped. The statistical probability of this exact scenario was minimal. The cost of retaining outdated manual systems couldn't be justified. Dutch held up one of the reports. This isn't about statistics, Doctor. This is criminal negligence. You knew the automated systems couldn't handle extreme pressure variations. You knew the old analog failsafes were more reliable. But admitting that would have meant admitting you were wrong. Those are classified documents, Steinberg said coldly. You have no authority to access them. In fact, your very presence on this submarine is illegal. I've kept my own records, Dutch replied. Every maintenance log, every system modification, every warning that was ignored. I documented everything before they pushed me out. And now I know why they were so eager to get rid of me. Steinberg's face hardened. No one will believe the accusations of a disgraced sailor over a Pentagon contractor with top-level clearance, especially not after you violated multiple protocols by coming aboard during a crisis. This isn't about believing me, Dutch said. It's about the evidence. These reports prove you knew about the design flaws. You buried the warnings to protect contracts worth millions of dollars, and now people might die because of your greed. Those records aren't going anywhere, Steinberg said quietly, and neither are you once this crisis is contained. I have friends in very high places, Chief Kowalski. This isn't the first time I've had to deal with complications. Dutch gathered the damning documents, tucking them securely in his jacket. The reactor situation is going to get worse before it gets better. When it does, people will want answers. Real answers, not your computer models and corporate double talk. Don't threaten me, Chief. Steinberg's voice was ice. You've already destroyed your career once. Don't make things worse for yourself. I'm not the one who needs to worry about making things worse, Dutch replied. 150 lives are at stake, and now I know exactly who put them there. Steinberg stared at him for a long moment before turning to leave. Remember what I said, Chief. Some fights aren't worth having, especially when you can't win them. Dutch watched him go, feeling the weight of the documents against his chest. The same evidence he'd tried to present 15 years ago, now finally complete. But first, he had to save the crew. After that, Steinberg would learn that some fights were worth any cost. Dutch stared at the radiation monitoring display, watching the numbers climb steadily higher. The red warning lights cast an eerie glow across the control room's metal surfaces. Every minute that passed brought them closer to catastrophe. The containment system is failing, he said, his voice heavy with the weight of what had to be done. We've got maybe 2 hours before radiation levels become lethal throughout the boat. Captain Torres stood beside him, her face drawn with concern. What are our options? There's only one way, Dutch said quietly. Someone has to go in there and manually initiate a controlled shutdown. The automated systems are making things worse. We need to disconnect them completely and handle this the old-fashioned way. That's suicide, Steinberg cut in sharply from across the room. The radiation levels in the reactor compartment are already above safe limits. Anyone who goes in there would receive a fatal dose within minutes. Dutch turned to face him. Then it's a good thing I'm already 68 years old, isn't it? Chief, no, Torres said, understanding flooding her features. There has to be another way. There isn't, Dutch replied firmly. I designed these systems. I know exactly what needs to be done. And I'm the only one here who's expendable. Steinberg stepped forward, his expensive shoes clicking on the metal deck. I cannot allow this. The liability issues alone. Liability? Dutch's voice rose. You're worried about liability while 150 people face radiation poisoning? The automated systems just need more time to... The automated systems are what got us into this mess. Dutch slammed his hand on the console. Your precious computers can't handle this situation. We need human hands on those controls. Torres moved between them, her command presence asserting itself. Dr. Steinberg, how long before your systems can implement a solution? Steinberg hesitated. The algorithms are still processing various scenarios. Perhaps another hour. We don't have another hour, Dutch interrupted. The containment seals are degrading. Once they fail, there's no stopping the radiation spread. He turned to Torres, his voice softening. Captain, you know I'm right. This is the only way. Torres studied him for a long moment, seeing not just the aged civilian before her, but the decorated chief who had trained her as a young officer. The radiation exposure, it would be fatal? Dutch nodded grimly. Pretty much guaranteed, but I've had a good run. Those kids out there, he gestured toward the crew spaces, they deserve their chance at a full life. This is completely unauthorized, Steinberg protested. He has no clearance, no authority. He has my authority, Torres cut him off sharply. As captain of this vessel, I am authorizing Chief Kowalski to implement emergency reactor procedures. I'll have your command for this, Steinberg threatened. You can have my command, Torres replied coldly, but first we're going to save my crew. Dutch was already moving, gathering the tools he would need. His hands moved with practiced familiarity over equipment he hadn't touched in 15 years. I'll need about 20 minutes to prepare. The shutdown sequence has to be perfect. One mistake and the whole containment system could rupture. I'll help you suit up, Torres said, following him toward the radiation gear locker. Captain, Steinberg called after them. If you do this, I'll ensure both of you face court-martial. Torres turned back, her eyes hard. Dr. Steinberg, if you interfere with this operation in any way, I will have you arrested for criminal negligence. Those maintenance records Chief Kowalski found make interesting reading." Steinberg's face went pale. He took a step back, adjusting his tie nervously. In the gear locker, Dutch methodically donned the radiation suit, his movements deliberate and focused. Torres helped him check the seals and monitors. "You taught me that sometimes one person has to risk everything to save others," Torres said quietly. Dutch smiled behind the clear faceplate. "Glad to see some of those lessons stuck. Just make sure those records get to the right people after this is done." "I will," Torres promised. "Those responsible will answer for this." Dutch finished his preparations and stood ready. Despite his age, he stood straight and strong, embodying the dignity of his former rank. "Captain, I need you to give the order. Make it official." Torres drew herself up, fighting back emotions that threatened to break through her command facade. "Chief Kowalski, you are hereby ordered to implement emergency reactor shutdown procedures. God be with you." Dutch snapped to attention and saluted. "Order acknowledged, Captain. It's been an honor." He turned toward the reactor compartment access, carrying his tools and his courage with equal steadiness. Behind him, Torres watched the old sailor walk toward his final duty, while Steinberg stood silent in his expensive suit, all his technology useless in the face of such simple heroism. Steinberg's face contorted with rage as he watched Dutch disappear down the corridor. He yanked a satellite phone from his briefcase and stabbed at the keypad with trembling fingers. "This is Dr. Marcus Steinberg. Get me Admiral Patterson immediately," he barked into the phone. "Emergency priority override." Captain Torres watched him warily as he paced the control room's tight confines. Her crew kept their eyes fixed on their stations, but she could feel their attention divided between their duties and the unfolding drama. "Admiral," Steinberg's voice dripped with artificial courtesy, "we have an emergency situation. The discharged Chief Kowalski is attempting an unauthorized reactor intervention. I need Marines dispatched to arrest him immediately." Torres felt her heart skip a beat. This was the moment she had dreaded, when institutional power would try to override what she knew was right. She thought of the 150 souls under her command, of Dutch's weathered hands that had taught her so much as a young officer. "Yes, Admiral. Captain Torres is failing to maintain proper command authority." Steinberg's eyes locked onto Torres with smug satisfaction. "She's allowing a discharged sailor to..." Torres stepped forward and pressed the communications console. "This is Captain Torres," she cut in firmly. "I have authorized Chief Kowalski's actions under emergency protocols. The situation requires immediate..." "Captain Torres," Admiral Patterson's clipped voice came through the speaker. "You are ordered to stand down and allow Dr. Steinberg to handle this situation through proper channels. That's a direct order." The control room fell silent. Every crew member watched their captain, waiting to see what she would choose. Torres stood perfectly still, feeling the weight of command heavy on her shoulders. "With all due respect, Admiral," she said carefully, "I cannot comply with that order." "Captain, you realize this will end your career?" The Admiral's voice was cold. "Yes, sir, I do." Torres straightened her spine. "But I will not stand by while 150 of my crew die to protect Dr. Steinberg's contracts." She turned to her crew. "Lieutenant Chen, seal the reactor compartment access. No one enters or leaves without my direct authorization." "Aye, Captain," Chen responded instantly, fingers flying over his console. "You can't do this!" Steinberg lunged for the phone. "Admiral, I demand immediate..." "Master Chief Sullivan," Torres called out, "please escort Dr. Steinberg to his quarters and ensure he remains there." Sullivan, a barrel-chested sailor with 20 years of service, stepped forward with 2 other crew members. "With pleasure, Captain." "This is mutiny," Steinberg shrieked as Sullivan took his arm. "You're all throwing away your careers. I'll have every one of you court-martialed." Master Chief, Torres added quietly, secure any communications devices in Dr. Steinberg's possession. You don't understand what you're doing? Steinberg struggled as Sullivan removed the satellite phone from his grip. The Pentagon will never forgive this insubordination. No, Torres agreed calmly. They probably won't, but my crew will live to testify about your negligence. As Sullivan led the protesting Steinberg away, Torres turned to address her crew. I won't order anyone to support this decision. If you wish to formally object, now is the time. One by one, her crew members stood at their stations. Lieutenant Chen spoke first. We're with you, Captain. All the way, another voice added. Dutch saved my brother's life on the Tennessee, called out Petty Officer Martinez. I trust him more than any computer. More voices joined in, a chorus of support that brought unexpected tears to Torres's eyes. These were her people. Not faceless numbers in a Pentagon report, but men and women who trusted her to keep them safe. Captain, her XO reported from the communication station, Admiral Patterson is demanding a response. Torres squared her shoulders and pressed the comm button. Admiral, this is Captain Torres. I take full responsibility for my actions and those of my crew. We will proceed with Chief Kowalski's reactor intervention. You can expect my resignation after we surface. She released the button before the Admiral could reply. Looking around at her crew, her family, she felt a profound sense of peace, despite knowing her career was over. Status report on Chief Kowalski? She called out. He's completing his equipment check now, Captain, Martinez responded. Radiation suit seals are confirmed. He'll be ready to enter the reactor compartment in 5 minutes. Torres nodded, silently praying she had made the right choice. But looking at her crew's determined faces, seeing their unity in this crisis, she knew there had never really been a choice at all. Some things were worth more than a career, worth more than all the gold-braided admirals and expensive contractors in Washington. Her crew would live. Dutch would have his chance to make things right. And if the price was her command, she would pay it gladly. Reactor control, she ordered. Prepare to assist Chief Kowalski on his mark. Let's get this done. Dutch's hands moved with practiced certainty as he sealed the radiation suit's final connections. After 50 years working with nuclear systems, he could have done it blindfolded. The thick rubber gloves felt familiar, like old friends coming to help one last time. Reactor compartment access ready, Chief, Lieutenant Chen's voice crackled through his helmet radio. Copy that, Dutch responded, his voice steady despite knowing what lay ahead. He checked his radiation badge one final time, pristine white, though he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. The heavy airlock door opened with a hiss. Dutch stepped through into the cramped reactor compartment, immediately assaulted by the piercing wail of multiple alarms. Red warning lights pulsed against steel walls, casting eerie shadows through clouds of steam venting from damaged seals. Reading you at 20 rems and climbing, Martinez reported from the control room. Reactor pressure still critical. Dutch moved methodically to the main control panel, his experienced eyes scanning gauges and indicators that had barely changed in 30 years. Where Steinberg's team had seen outdated technology, Dutch saw reliable systems he'd helped design, systems that spoke to him in a language of pressure, differentials, and coolant flows. Primary coolant loop showing cavitation, he reported, fingers dancing across manual controls. Digital override has the backup pumps fighting each other. The first drops of sweat rolled down his forehead inside the stifling suit. He ignored them, focusing instead on disabling the Pentagon's automated improvements, one by one. With each system returned to manual control, small pieces of stability returned. An ominous click from his chest made him glance down. The radiation badge had turned yellow. They had estimated he had 30 minutes before reaching dangerous exposure levels. He'd have to work faster. Chief, your radiation reading just spiked. Captain Torres' worried voice came through. You need to... Understood, Captain. Dutch cut in calmly. But we've got bigger problems. That coolant leak is worse than the sensors showed. He could see it now. a hairline crack in a junction that the computer models had missed completely. Modern sensors calibrated for catastrophic failures had overlooked this slow killer. But Dutch's eyes, trained by decades of hands-on experience, spotted it immediately. His fingers found familiar valve controls, muscle memory guiding them to settings he'd learned as a young sailor. The reactor's deep thrumming changed pitch slightly as he manually adjusted coolant flow patterns, bypassing damaged sections. Another click from his chest, the badge showed red now. "Chief, you're at critical exposure levels," Martinez warned. "Time to pull out." "Negative," Dutch replied, sweat now pouring down his face. "Main seals won't hold without manual realignment. 5 more minutes." He could feel the radiation's effects beginning. A slight dizziness, a metallic taste in his mouth. His hands didn't shake, though. They never shook when lives depended on them. The next 10 minutes passed in a blur of technical adjustments and system responses. Dutch's world narrowed to pressure gauges and coolant flows, his decades of experience guiding every movement. Where complex computer models had failed, his simple understanding of mechanical systems prevailed. "Pressure dropping in primary loop," Chen reported excitedly. "Secondary systems responding. Containment reading stabilizing." Dutch allowed himself a small smile as he watched the reactor's rhythms settle into familiar patterns. The alarms began silencing one by one, red warning lights fading to normal status green. "Reactor stabilized," he confirmed, voice slightly hoarse. "All critical systems returning to normal parameters." The cheering that erupted over his radio almost deafened him. 150 voices celebrating life snatched back from the brink. Dutch leaned against the control panel, suddenly exhausted. "Good work, Chief," Torres said, emotion clear in her voice. "Now get out of there immediately. Your radiation levels are minus." "One last thing, Captain," Dutch interrupted. He pulled a small digital camera from his suit pocket. "Need to document this junction fault. Evidence of what Steinberg covered up." His hands were starting to shake now as he photographed the hairline crack and its surrounding documentation plates. The pictures would prove that this had been a known flaw, one buried in reports to protect profitable contracts. "Done," he announced, securing the camera back in its radiation-proof case. "Reactor compartment ready to secure?" Dutch made his way back to the airlock on unsteady legs, each step requiring more concentration than the last. The radiation exposure was catching up with him, but he'd accomplished what he came to do. The crew would live. The truth would come out. As the airlock cycle began, he heard Captain Torres speaking quietly through his radio. "Thank you, Dutch. For everything." He tried to respond, but the words wouldn't come. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was his radiation badge, now an angry, deep crimson that told its own story of sacrifice. The USS Leviathan broke through the Arctic ice with a thunderous crack, sending sheets of frozen seawater cascading off its massive hull. Sunlight streamed into the control room for the first time in weeks, but the crew's celebration was cut short by urgent calls from the medical bay. "Medical emergency! Chief Kowalski is unresponsive." The ship's doctor's voice crackled over the intercom. Captain Torres rushed through the narrow corridors, her boots clanging against steel decking. She found Dutch unconscious on an examination table, his skin ashen gray. Medical staff worked frantically around him, attaching monitors and starting intravenous lines. "Radiation exposure levels are off the charts," Dr. Sarah Chen reported grimly, studying the readings. "We need to get him to a specialized facility immediately." Within hours, a medical helicopter touched down on the ice beside the surfaced submarine. The crew watched in tense silence as their savior was carefully transferred aboard. Dutch's radiation badge, still that telling deep crimson, was carefully preserved as evidence along with his sealed camera. "Come on, old friend," Torres whispered as the helicopter lifted off. "You've got one more fight left." While Dutch battled for his life in the Norfolk Naval Hospital's radiation treatment unit, his meticulously maintained maintenance logs began telling their own story. The documents, spanning 15 years, detailed every modification, every inspection, and every warning sign that Steinberg had buried. Special Agent Monica Rodriguez from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service spread the logs across her desk, building a damning timeline. Chief Kowalski documented everything, she explained to Captain Torres during a formal interview. Every time he raised concerns about the reactor design flaws, every time Steinberg's team dismissed them, every safety report that mysteriously disappeared. The photographs Dutch had taken in the reactor compartment proved to be the final piece of evidence. They showed the exact fault he had documented years ago, the same one Steinberg had claimed was fixed by his automated systems. Congressional hearings began 3 weeks later. The packed chamber fell silent as Senator Elizabeth Marshall held up Dutch's maintenance logs. "These records show a clear pattern of criminal negligence," Marshall declared, her voice sharp with controlled anger. "Dr. Steinberg, would you care to explain why you buried Chief Kowalski's safety warnings about the reactor design?" Steinberg sat alone at the witness table, his expensive suit no longer projecting authority. "The automated systems were certified as completely safe," he insisted, his arrogance cracking under pressure. "The chief's concerns were based on outdated..." "Outdated?" Marshall interrupted, holding up the photographs from the reactor compartment. "These images show exactly what Chief Kowalski warned about 5 years ago. The same flaw that nearly killed 150 sailors when your modern systems failed to detect it." The evidence mounted day after day. Internal emails showed Steinberg had actively suppressed safety reports that questioned his automated solutions. Financial records revealed millions in Pentagon contracts that would have been jeopardized if the reactor's design flaws had been acknowledged. The defendant systematically chose profit over human lives. The federal prosecutor summarized during Steinberg's criminal trial. He buried safety concerns, falsified inspection reports, and nearly caused a nuclear disaster, all to protect his contracts. The jury took only 4 hours to return their verdict. Steinberg stood ashen-faced as the judge read out his sentence: 15 years in federal prison for criminal negligence and conspiracy to defraud the government. But the most powerful moment of justice came 3 months after the Leviathan surfaced. Dutch, still weak but recovering, sat in his wheelchair in the Secretary of the Navy's office. The small ceremony had none of the pomp of the congressional hearings, but its significance was far greater. "Chief Petty Officer Franklin Kowalski," the Secretary began, his voice solemn. "After reviewing the evidence uncovered during the investigation, it is clear that your discharge 15 years ago was a grave injustice. Your service record has been amended. You will be reinstated at your former rank with full honors and back pay." Dutch's weathered hands trembled slightly as he accepted the formal documents, his vindication in black and white. Captain Torres, standing at attention beside him, didn't bother hiding her tears. "Furthermore," the Secretary continued, "your actions aboard the USS Leviathan demonstrated the highest traditions of naval service. Your expertise and courage saved 150 lives at great personal cost. It is my privilege to present you with the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for heroic conduct." The small gold medal gleamed as it was pinned to Dutch's chest. He looked down at it, then at the reinstatement papers, his blue eyes bright with emotion. "Thank you, sir," he said simply. "But I didn't do it for medals. Those sailors needed help. That's all that mattered." The Secretary smiled. "That attitude, Chief, is exactly why we need people like you. Your experience, your integrity, they're worth more than any computer system. We lost sight of that once. It won't happen again." As Dutch was wheeled out of the office, Captain Torres walking beside him, he saw dozens of sailors lining the hallway. They snapped to attention as he passed, rendering sharp salutes to the vindicated chief who had risked everything to save their shipmates. Dutch returned each salute carefully, his posture straight despite his weakness. The radiation exposure had taken its toll. The doctors said he would never fully recover, but seeing justice served made the sacrifice worthwhile. His principled stand, maintained through 15 years of disgrace, had finally been proven right. The truth had come out. Lives had been saved. Honor had been restored. For Dutch, that was all the victory he had ever needed. The winter sun streamed through the windows of Norfolk Naval Hospital's rehabilitation wing, casting long shadows across Dutch's physical therapy room. 6 months had passed since that fateful day in the Arctic, and though his body still bore the effects of radiation exposure, his determination remained unshaken. "Looking stronger every day, Chief," said Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen, his attending physician, as Dutch completed another set of exercises. His hands, once trembling and weak, now gripped the parallel bars with renewed strength. "Can't keep an old sailor down for long, Doc," Dutch replied, managing a smile despite the exertion. The radiation treatment had taken its toll. His silver hair had thinned, and some days the fatigue still hit him like a wave. But he was alive, and that was more than he'd expected when he entered that reactor compartment. Captain Torres visited regularly, bringing news from the Navy's ongoing reforms. Today she arrived wearing a broader smile than usual, carrying an official-looking envelope. "Dutch," she called from the doorway, "we've got something for you." He settled into a chair, accepting a glass of water from the physical therapist. Torres pulled up a seat beside him and handed over the envelope. Inside was a formal letter bearing the Secretary of the Navy's seal. "They're not just restoring your honorable discharge status," Torres explained, watching as Dutch's eyes moved across the page. "They want you back, in a different capacity." Dutch looked up, his sharp blue eyes questioning. "What kind of capacity?" "Training," Torres said. "The Navy's establishing a new program for nuclear technicians. They want experienced chiefs teaching hands-on skills alongside the technical training, and they want you to help design and lead it." Dutch sat back, considering the offer. After 15 years of running his small engine repair shop, the Navy was offering him a chance to pass on everything he'd learned. All those years of experience, the knowledge that had saved 150 lives aboard the Leviathan, could help shape a new generation of sailors. "The automation systems aren't going away," Torres continued, "but the Pentagon's finally admitted we need both. Human expertise and technology working together. Your situation showed them what happens when we rely too heavily on one over the other." Dutch nodded slowly. "And what about you, Captain? Last I heard, they were talking court-martial for defying orders." Torres's smile widened. "Just got word this morning. Not only are they dropping any consideration of charges, but I'm up for promotion. Seems saving a nuclear submarine and its entire crew counts for something after all." "Admiral Torres," Dutch tested the words, "has a nice ring to it." "They said my actions demonstrated exceptional judgment and moral courage in crisis conditions," Torres quoted, then grew serious. "But we both know I just did what you taught me years ago. Trust your people and your training, not just the computers." The rehabilitation room fell quiet as Dutch considered the offer. Through the window, he could see young sailors walking between buildings on the naval base. Future submariners, reactor technicians, officers, all of them needing the kind of knowledge that couldn't be downloaded from a database or learned from a simulation. "You know," he said finally, "when I was fighting Steinberg's automation push 15 years ago, I never thought I'd see this day. The Navy actually wanting to preserve hands-on experience." Torres leaned forward. "Things are changing, Dutch. Your stand aboard the Leviathan proved why we need both kinds of expertise. The new training program will make sure we never lose that balance again." Dutch picked up the letter again, reading through the details of the position. Lead instructor for practical nuclear systems training. Authority to develop hands-on curriculum. Direct input on safety protocols and maintenance procedures. "Says here I'd be working with civilian contractors too," he noted. "That's right," Torres confirmed. "The Navy wants to build bridges between the technical and practical sides. No more US versus them mentality. Your experience with both worlds makes you perfect for it. Dutch thought about his small engine shop, about the satisfaction of fixing things with his hands, but he also thought about all the knowledge stored in his head, decades of experience that could save lives if properly passed on. "When do they want an answer?" he asked. "Take your time," Torres replied. "They know you're still recovering, but they're serious about this, Dutch. They want to make sure what happened on the Leviathan never happens again." Over the next few weeks, as Dutch continued his recovery, the pieces fell into place. The Navy formally restored his honorable discharge status in a small ceremony attended by his former crew members. His maintenance logs and safety recommendations became required reading for nuclear program supervisors, and slowly, the institution that had once cast him aside began to change. Torres's promotion to Rear Admiral came through, along with a new posting overseeing submarine safety protocols. She made sure Dutch's experience informed every new regulation and training requirement. 3 months later, Dutch stood before his first class of nuclear technician trainees. His hands no longer shook, though he knew he'd never regain all his former strength. But his mind was sharp as ever, and these young sailors needed what he could teach them. "Technology's important," he told them, gesturing to the advanced diagnostic equipment lining the walls. "But it's not everything. You need to understand these systems with your hands and your gut, not just your head. Because someday when the computers fail and the alarms are blaring, that understanding might be all that stands between disaster and survival." The students listened intently, many of them having heard about his actions aboard the Leviathan. But Dutch wasn't interested in war stories. He was focused on passing on the kind of knowledge that had taken him decades to accumulate. After class, Torres, now wearing her admiral's stars, stopped by to observe. She found Dutch in the practical training lab, demonstrating proper maintenance techniques to a group of eager young sailors. "How does it feel?" she asked when the students had gone. "Being back in uniform?" Dutch ran a hand along the reactor mock-up they used for training. "Feels right," he said simply. "These kids are sharp. They know their theory, their computers, but they're hungry to learn the hands-on stuff too. That's what matters." Torres nodded, understanding. This was Dutch's real victory, not just personal redemption or institutional recognition, but ensuring that crucial knowledge wouldn't be lost. The Navy had learned its lesson about balancing progress with experience, and Dutch was helping forge that new path forward. "You know," Torres said, "Steinberg's replacement actually asked if you'd consult on their new safety protocols. Seems they're finally ready to listen to the old-timers." Dutch chuckled. "Maybe we're all learning something. Progress isn't about throwing away what works. It's about building on it, making it better." As they walked through the training facility, Dutch saw his future laid out before him. Not just teaching technical skills, but passing on the wisdom that came from years of hands-on experience. The kind of wisdom that saved lives when everything else failed. The institution had changed, and so had he. Together, they were ensuring that future sailors would have the best of both worlds, cutting-edge technology and hard-earned experience. For Dutch, that was the greatest victory of all. Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.